So how this is going to work this afternoon is for the first hour, we have a hands-on workshop to keep us all active. So Sophia de Sousa from the Glasshouse Community-Led Design has very kindly agreed to run this session for us. And then after that hour, we'll then go into 3 more traditional presentations, followed by questions.
I'm going to whiz you quickly through a few slides to tell you just a little bit about our organization and what we do very briefly, but mostly a little introduction to how we use community asset mapping, both in the research that we do in collaboration with higher education and just in our practice every day as a charity. So, first lesson in facilitation, be able to think on your feet. I was told I'd have tables today, and I don't, so this is why we've got these targets all around the room. So about the Glasshouse, very quickly, we're a small national charity, and we work connecting people with the design of places. And we're really interested in this connection between people, design, and place, and the process and the journey of people going through a change process for their built environment. We believe very strongly that design offers an opportunity to bring people together, to collaborate, and that it's really important that people should have a voice in shaping their local places. But we also feel like it offers an empowerment opportunity. You can develop new skills, create new networks, build social capital. So for us, we're really interested in that interplay between design, people, and place, and the empowerment opportunities that they offer. We have a strategic partnership with the design group at Open University, and we've been working with them for about 7 years now on a number of projects funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, all around this interplay between design, people, and place. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a couple of projects in which we've both developed asset mapping tools and in which these asset mapping tools have really kind of taken us in interesting directions. They're all really simple things, and I think what I'd like to say as a preface to all of this is not at all smart in the digital sense. All of the things that we're using are really basic, hands-on materials and conversations, and they're also largely about bringing people together rather than individuals. Okay, so that's a really important context for us. So first of all, what do we mean by assets? When we are working in the built environment, when you say the word asset, most people think buildings. We, of course, don't think buildings, and I don't think most of the people in this room will think buildings. We think of all of the different types of resources, connections, skills that can be brought together as an asset to make something happen. Okay? Here we've got, I'll tell you a little bit more about this particular tool later, but it just kind of shows the spectrum. It's people, it's organizations, it's places, it's digital infrastructure, all of that together. This project, Unearth Hidden Assets, that we did, it was led by Brunel University, and this project was all about working with communities on live projects that they had instigated and were leading, and injecting a little bit of research methodology, but also practice from the practitioners involved in the project. All of these projects bring together academia and research, practice, and community development and leadership, and just community action, basically. This one was particularly focusing on how do you help communities unearth their assets and mobilize them. We have a tendency, particularly in the built environment, to talk about involving communities in place shaping as just asking their opinion. What do you think about this version, or this version of development? But actually, it's about how do you mobilize people and all of the things around them, not just as residents with an opinion, but as contributors to the process and leaders of the process of change. As you can see, it was a really complex group of partners involved. And we worked in particular with this group, this wonderful group of mothers in Tidworth who were army wives. They were women who were left alone by their husbands for most of the year because their husbands were away on tours of duty, in a place where there really wasn't much. And actually a local authority project to gather voices captured the fact that these young women felt like they didn't really have much power. There was the infrastructure offered by the local authority, the infrastructure offered by the Army Welfare Service, but they didn't feel like they really had what they needed. And actually, through the process of being interviewed, these women got together and they formed a group. And this group was called the Tidworth Mums. And they thought, we don't have enough play facilities in the area. We want to set up a soft play centre. So they thought, we'll find a building, we'll rent it or we'll buy it, we'll put the infrastructure in place, and we will run our own soft play centre. So we sat down with them and said, okay, well, before you start that, let's have a look at your assets. And we simply, using really simple tools of wooden blocks, bits of paper, little figures that you would have in a board game, we just started moving them through this exercise of mapping what they had, both available to them immediately and what they felt was in reach. We also then went on to map what wasn't in reach. And as they started to talk about things and thought, well, actually, I know somebody who knows that person, or I know somebody who's got a building we could use, or they started to move these objects further into the center of these rings. Now, you see these rings round the room. You're going to be using them a little bit differently. But what was really interesting is they thought, oh, actually, we do have a lot of assets here. And then we asked the question, well, do you really want to mobilize these assets in this way? And do you have enough information? And part of the exercise was, okay, we know the assets that you've got. Really, what's the best way to mobilize them? And do you have enough information about your wider community and what they want to make those decisions? So then we moved them into a space of asset mapping within their communities. So we organized with them a mega soft play day. And what was really interesting about this was, with an incredibly small budget, and in conversation with the local council, and in conversation with the Army Welfare Centre, who together owned this quite well-equipped leisure centre, and who said, okay, you can have the space for free for a day. We don't offer any play service in the area, so someone may as well. You can use the space. They set up, they hired in a bit of equipment, and they set up this play day during half term, so children in school holidays would have somewhere to go. But there was an important twist that we added, which was that this was also a research exercise. So children who were there were asked to try out all the different equipment and decide what they liked. And there were posters around the room where kids could put sticky dots and kids could put marbles into jars and essentially vote on the bits of the space and the day that they liked best. There was also a modeling space where kids could create their own ideas for what would be good at play equipment, what they'd really like to play with. There were interview spaces where people could talk to the parents about, well, if we did set up a soft play centre, where should it be? Does it need to be in walking distance? How much would you be willing to pay? How often would you use it? And through one day, they had something like 130 families through there in sessions. It was an incredible thing. But they gathered really important data that actually proved that they didn't need a new soft play centre. It proved actually that a day like this, every once in a while, was enough. So it was a really important exercise in really doing homework about changes to an area properly by talking to people, by playing, by actually offering activities that are fun, but at the same time are gathering really useful data. They've continued to do this, and they continue to use it as a research exercise. But also importantly, this activity placed the Tidworth mums in a strategic position in local policy making. This activity also demonstrated to both the Army Welfare Service and to the local authority that actually play provision is really important. And both have now brought in programs that were not existing before to bring play provision into the area. So it was a really small, simple exercise, but with huge ramifications. And this quote, I think, is so important. Being involved in the research has given me new insights into what is meant by assets. We used to see these as physical things, such as buildings, but we now recognize that people are assets and that our group, the Tidworth Mums, is a valuable asset for the community. And I think my message from this example to this research team and to the group is that research activities themselves are opportunities to empower people and to position people locally. And so to try and think about how anything that you're doing within these asset mapping workshops and your interface with the community can help change things locally and empower people in that process. Another project that we did was called Scaling Up Co-Design, and it was about how do you help small community and voluntary sector organizations, small charities and social enterprises scale up the impact and the reach of their activity without them having to become huge monster organizations. There are a lot of us charities doing very focused work and doing interesting things, and we just do, but we don't want to become a 100-person strong organization. We want to stay small and mobile, but there are limitations with that. And taking part in this research, all of the practitioners within this research group were really small organizations, all of them in quite, delicate, precarious situations in terms of future funding. And so we said to the academics in the room, well, we can take part, but what we don't want is for this project to create lots of extra work for us. We're really interested in the field of study. We want to learn more about it and what co-design can do, but actually it can't compromise our organizations and our activities, which is another really important lesson. And so what we did was we all mapped out, with this first diagram on the left, activities we were already doing, projects that we were working on, that were already in motion or that we were just about to start, that we thought actually we could use some more assets for. And we each talked a little bit about one of our projects, and the others in the room said, well, I could contribute to that in this way. And we mapped really simple connections that we could make within the research team and how the research activity could enrich our activities, resource our activities in a way, but how we could usefully extract learning and data from them. A year later, we did another map, and you can see the difference in complexity of these maps, because the catalytic action of that first bit of activity together within the research project sparked all kinds of collaborations that happened outside of the research project. For example, the Glass House worked with the social enterprise in Sheffield that worked teaching media skills to people on in the margins of society. We went and did a workshop there about people's interaction with the places around us and whether they include or exclude us. They then came down, the very people we were training on that, came down, used their newly acquired media skills and trained a bunch of young people we were working with in a redevelopment scheme in London. So again, that was a moment of we can go in and do a little bit of work there, but we can also create opportunities for those people to come and take a leadership role within another space. That then led to countless other collaborations, and that happened all across this project. So what was a very small budget, a one-year project with each organisation with about £5,000 to play with in terms of doing some catalytic work, turned into years of collaboration across this network. So we called this project, this process, cross-pollinating, right? It was all about us pollinating each other's flowers, if you like. So then we took this into other contexts. I took it into a regeneration conference, and I used, instead of the different organizations, I said, okay, well, let's think about this in a placemaking process. How could we go into a place and mobilize, identify and mobilize assets? So the first step was mapping. I asked everyone around the table to say, okay, what do you need in your neighborhood? That was the first question. We need a place where, right? And then all of them just had to note down on cards things they knew about that were available resources. They could be places, they could be people, they could be skills, just stuff, access to funding. And they chucked all this down on notes. And then I said, okay, go back to your questions about what you need and how can you make it happen. And it's amazing what they came up with. We're now going to experiment with this within a regeneration program. It's a really simple process. It's not rocket science at all. But actually, what people realized sitting around the table was that individually, both through their personal and professional connections, they had access to an enormous spectrum of assets. And it was only through coming together and everyone putting all of their assets on the table that they could then mobilize. So there's another cross-pollinating day. In this case, they came up with a skill-sharing network. Okay? In this case, they came up with, well, we could do a community garden there. That would be really easy. Another group came up with a mobile social space on a bus because somebody knew of a bus within their network that sat in a garage most of the time, and they said, well, we could turn that into a social space. We've also been involved in this project which looked across different asset mapping techniques, and I would recommend that you have a look at this website because there are both UK and international examples here. We worked, for instance, with a fantastic group in Greece called the Atenistas, who are sort of guerrilla urbanists, if you like. They just go in and change places when they look a bit grotty and make initiatives. But that's a really nice overview of a lot of different projects that have done this kind of work. At the moment, we're involved in one which is called Empowering Design Practices, and this is really looking at historic places of worship as catalysts for connecting the wider community, as places, as community centres around the country are disappearing. Social services are disappearing. Funding is disappearing. Suddenly, places of worship offer an opportunity. They have these fantastic spaces that are not used for much of the week and usually very well located within an urban context. So how could these be spaces that start to offer, as they once did, traditionally they were places where all kinds of things happened. They become places that are mostly for faith practices. So we were looking at, well, how can we mobilize these places through asset mapping and through co-design processes? This little exercise we did, Assets, Challenges and Opportunities, was about sitting the group of people who look after a place of worship down together and starting to really look at their challenges. Often it's a leaky roof, it's damp, it's a small worshipping community, or a worshipping community that's too big and they don't have the space for it. So really start to put those down in writing and identify them individually. But also then to identify their assets, which might be, well, we've got somebody who's really good at gardening in our group, or we've got somebody who knows how to design a website, or we've got somebody who is an architect. So all of those pulling out, what is the asset of the building itself? Well, it's a fantastic space. It's got historical context and links to the community. People in the area are very fond of it. They love it. In one case, we were working with a church that's in, do you know the song Oranges and Lemons said the bells of St. Clement's? Well, there you go. One of them was in that little song. That itself is an asset. So we were trying to pull out all of the things that were useful and putting together the assets and the challenges to create opportunities. So what's different about this step, and I suppose using the cross-pollination step as well, is about moving from mapping to mobilizing. And I think that's the question as well that I put to your team. How much of it is about mapping what's happening now, and how much of it is about mobilizing? Somebody raised the question of voice and how the digital world and the need to, to make anonymous some voices within the digital collection processes. Well, how can you do that in other ways as well? And again, through this empowering design practices, we collected voices. We felt that was really important for the groups looking after these places to understand the voices in the community to help guide their decision making. And you start to have the narratives that come through. There was one, when I open the door, I feel welcome. I have friends here. And I think this is the sort of thing that you will be looking at within your project as well, from what I understand of it, the importance of why a place is precious to us, why it's important, why we have a relationship with it, and might be nervous about it changing as well. This was simply people writing things down, hanging them on a washing line, really basic stuff. We did another exercise. This was in Bow in East London. We asked them to imagine their utopian place and to write down one word to describe the place they wanted to live in. And really interestingly, here we've got some quite physical things, a place to play football, more places like the Bromley by Bow Centre. But actually, most of the words that came up were words relating to values, respect, interaction, lots of a sense of safety, a sense of belonging, but also, it was amazing how much the word respect came up actually, and how can a place embody that value. So again, really simple exercises. We were literally standing on a street corner with some balloons and labels, stuck the balloons to a fence with a label hanging from it. And it also became a space where people could begin to interact with other voices and understand different points of view and other perspectives. And I think that's another really important part of asset mapping. It's not just about asking people's views and for information, it's about creating spaces for them to understand other people's views. And it's something that we have found in our work at the Glass House. Actually, young people in particular have said to us, well, people always treat us as a hard-to-reach group. And then they come and talk to us, and then they take our views away. But we never have the opportunity to talk to people of different ages about what we think and what we feel is important. And actually, those spaces for interaction and to talk through how we feel about a place and how our ambitions for the future and what's important to us about it now and that we're worried about with the process of change is really important, a space for people to talk them through. Within the Glasshouse practice, on a very place-making, through a place-making lens, we did an exercise, we've done this in a few places, where we literally sat down with maps. Right? And we asked, and kids love it as well, and they're often much better at reading the maps than the adults and feel very empowered to help the adults. But we simply took maps, and at different tables we mapped different things. So at one we mapped, where do you go to play or relax? Where's your kind of social infrastructure here? On another we mapped transport. Where are the bus stops? Where are the roads, and which are the pressure points that get congested, and why do you think that is? Make some notes on it. At another table, we looked at services. And that was a way also people could choose what they felt they wanted to contribute to, and could move around from one to another. But it's incredible the amount of information we gathered in a day. And the lovely thing that comes out, of course, with that, and it's worth having a recorder nearby, was the conversation and the stories that emerged. The people who've been living there for 40 years talking to the people who've just moved there about, well, you know, when I first moved here, there was a corner shop there, and what's different about it now is, and it starts to pull out some of those stories and the narratives of the place. And that brings us to trying to talk collectively about what we value. And this is an essential part of asset mapping, and I think something you're very keen to explore in your project. This was actually an interdisciplinary arts project that wanted to set up a way to work together. They were doing a project working with people who, again, on the margins of society, wanted to get involved in the arts. And it was created really simple spaces for them to come into, but 3 quite different organizations were going to work together on this. And they were a little bit nervous about it. And so we sat down with them and did an exercise of, well, you know, let's talk about what you value as individual organizations and what you value in terms of this project. And let's come up with some shared values as your starting point. And from those shared values, they then set quality indicators of their project. They used it as a framework for decision-making throughout their project. But again, it was treating values as assets as well, and understanding them as assets and things that were important to the group collectively. So that is what you're going to do in a way now with these rings around the room. I'm going to ask you to congregate in 4 groups around these boards, which are intentionally all a little bit different, and we'll talk about that afterwards. You can choose which board you want to go to. You'll all be doing the same thing. Now, you all live in different places. You come from very wildly different contexts, but I'd like you to each think about your neighborhood and think about places in your neighborhood that are important to you, okay? And I'd like you on Post-its, you'll find pens and Post-its on the floor in front of these boards. I'd like you each to just take a few minutes, and hopefully there are enough Post-its for everyone to write 2 or 3. Just write down a different place per Post-it of places that you value, right, that you think are really important. Now, you can describe these in generic terms, or you can describe them, you can put the name down, but you will talk to each other about them, okay? So you need to be prepared to defend why this place is important to you. When you've all written down 2 or 3 places, I'd like you to start by just sticking them all up around. I don't know whether they'll stick to this, but we'll see. If not, you can stick them on the edges of the paper. And in turn, I'd like you to present your place to the group, and you can put it actually on the paper. If another person mentions the same place, you can move it in a ring. If another person mentions the same place, and again here we're talking about type of place, move it in a ring, okay? Now, you can negotiate. You might decide, well, to move in, 3 people have to say it. I'll leave it to you as a group to negotiate whether it's just, 2 people moves it in or 3 people move it in a ring. But the point is you'll start to see a physical manifestation of the places that your group value, that you have a shared view on, and those that are more individual preferences, okay? I'd also like you to talk about in that journey. Now, other people will say things that you think, oh yeah, I didn't think of that, but that's important to me as well. If that's the case, you can take your pen and do a little star or a tick or something to annotate that, yeah, you agree with that one. You didn't think of that one, but you agree with that one. Okay, is that clear? So there are 3 basic steps. One is write the places that you value. 2, talk about them as a group, introduce them to each other as a group, and as a group, start to move them around and to signal that you agree with those, okay? And I will give you, it's going to be fast and furious, 10 minutes to do it. So you're going to have to come up with your places in 2 minutes. Okay, so first of all, they all look a bit different, don't they? Can I ask, how did you choose which board you went to? Nearest? Did any of you choose a space where there were fewer people? Yeah? Okay. Did any of you choose the ones that had been printed but just drawn? Yes? Okay. Did any of you notice the selection of colors you had in your group of pens? You chose green. People are attached to colors. Blue? Okay. Okay. And could we just throw out some quick reactions to this exercise? I know it was really fast, and I apologize for that, but some quick thoughts from doing this. Anyone? Yeah?
2 thoughts. One was that all of us tended to write about places rather than about intangible places. But those places, as we were talking about, it turned out to be actually, some of it was intangible, like the thermal power plant. It wasn't actually the power plant, but what it meant. That's one thought. The other thought is more broader, relating to our. Have you come across a situation in which the participants you're working with either don't feel comfortable writing about these things or drawing these, or in our case might be illiterate, not able to write, and how you might work with this?
To answer that question straight away is help them write it. Talk. This is essentially a conversation that you're having. As long as one person who can write it down, that's fine. I'm going to not go to you because you're part of the team. And who hasn't spoken yet? You haven't spoken yet. Have you? Oh, it's the same old talkers. Then I'll come back to the same old talkers.
Yeah, also just in my mind, like kind of positional knowledge biases to come through, like depending on background, upbringing, context, that how you use a certain term to describe something can be like perceived differently between different groups. So having to justify that or explain that. And even then, like sometimes the gap might be too big for it to be understood or to be, yeah, it's just notice that came through.
Okay, so really good, yeah. So cultural references are really different within any group. Who else had now? I'll come back to you.
I don't know if this was just our group, but I felt like we were all aiming for positive things to begin with, and it's not necessary that everything is positive and then
I did ask you to talk about places you loved, so I set you on that path. Did any negative things come out?
So I have 2 quick points about this. One is, for me, what stood out as an experiential learning from this activity is we spoke a lot about what is the value that people attach to a certain place, or what is a thing or tangible or intangible that they identify as an asset. But it is equally important to pay attention to what is the value that you attach as facilitators to their values, because a lot of marginality would happen there. In quick categorization, because that's how the activity is designed, you have to categorize and find an easy language to an experience which is not necessarily easy. So an example from here I would give. Of course, I mean, I understand the fact that we were not from similar culture, and so the mapping that we are doing is not context bound. So with that in the background, but in terms of negative memory association, I deliberately put, because your question was what are the places that stand out in your memory through the places that you have lived. And for me, streets are very important. I remember every street where I have faced sexual harassment. And the moment I put it, and my group mates asked me, why is it? I explained, and they said, oh, this is a negative memory. But it is not a negative memory for me, and I tried reasserting that. And eventually, streets did not find a place in the center stage of that imaginary, which is very personally important to me. So this is not like, it's not a reflection on the group dynamic. I'm just saying as mappers, or whatever we choose to call ourselves, I think like the way, how do you really ensure this, not just in terms of feel good, but in terms of instrumental value of the data that we are collecting, how do you make it intelligible to me that what you have given as a data would actually feed back into an instrumental sense? That's first. Second is to you. I'm wondering how is this mapping exercise really different from what we have been doing in subaltern cultures, what we call as participatory research action. In villages, it's the same thing, resource mapping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just wondering, bringing back to the question that somebody had asked, that what is really smart or about jugaad? Because in participatory action research, we do a lot of jugaad by pooling in local resources to actually do the mapping. But the smartness comes from how you deploy it. So I'm just wondering, is it like really new? Is it really different? What is the value of calling it this and not calling that?
I think the name of it is not that important to me. I suppose, and that's a really interesting point, because I am not an academic, right? I'm a practitioner. For me, what's important is what can I do with it, and what can it mobilize for other people to do with. And I think, for me, your point about your particular memories, the narratives that come out, here we've got a kind of quantitative, statistical visualization with these maps. What we don't have there is the stories. So it's how this sits alongside the stories and how you capture those. But also, did you feel like you got to know some of the other people in your group a little bit more? That is an important output for me. It's how do these processes of mapping, you're getting your statistical data, mobilize local networks of knowledge and conversations and stories. Okay, all right. Do I need to hand over now to the next one? Does anyone else have one more?
Well, from our group, I think one of the very interesting observations was that some of us came up with places which are inside our house, and not outside or not in the community, which are places that we really like to sit down or, cook or, or a balcony, for example. So this really depends, and this is, even though it sounds like, okay, there's nothing to do with urban studies with a place inside the house, but it also reflects that where your place is situated, what you can see from standing on a balcony. So that has implications on how our cities are built, and that how we appreciate the place within our houses.
What are the challenges of this type of activity within your particular context in which you'll be working, and how would you need to adapt it to make it more fit for purpose? Oh, I didn't do it in the microphone, sorry. Okay. Did you manage to capture? Do you want me to? Okay, sorry, I'll just say them really quickly again, sorry. So, how would it be different in practice when everyone taking part is talking about the same neighborhood? What could this activity do to help your research? Again, both in terms of data collection, but also in terms of process, bringing people together, moving things forward, mobilizing connections and activity. Think about the challenges in your particular context and how would you have to adapt it. This was a really fast and furious exercise that we did. It's an iteration of various things that I talked about there. It's all basically the same stuff. It's just adapting it to your particular research question and the context. And I'll step away. Great.